The topic for this video is the Taiping Rebellion, which was a conflict within China that lasted from 1850 to 1864. This rebellion, which was really more of a civil war among the Chinese, devastated nearly half of China's provinces and destroyed their economy, leading to the deaths of an estimated 20 million people. To put that number in perspective, about 650,000 people died during the American Civil War, which took place at the same time. How did this happen? How and why did 20 million Chinese die while fighting their fellow Chinese? To understand the causes of the rebellion, try to imagine what it would be like if a previously unknown foreign army suddenly appeared in Atlanta. Maybe this foreign army would march downtown or through the streets of your neighborhood. Imagine this foreign army coming to your house and taking all of your possessions, humiliating your parents right in front of your eyes. Imagine the foreign army coming to Lubbock, coming to your school, and publicly humiliating all the people of authority within the school. Imagine what it would be like if the foreign army gathered the entire school and then forced your favorite administrator or teacher or coach to kowtow, to bow down before the commander of the army. Imagine if the foreign army shaved their heads in humiliation. And then as quickly as these foreigners appeared, they disappear. That would be a traumatizing experience, and you might want to look for someone to blame. Perhaps you would blame the federal government, whose job it is to protect America's borders. China experienced a similar moment of frustration and blame after the First Opium War. The British, in capturing town after town along the Chinese coast, spread a hatred not only of Westerners, but also of the Qing dynasty. The Chinese public, generally speaking, began to believe that the emperor and his government were not only incompetent, but that they also lost, quote, the heavenly mandate. What that means is that the Chinese public stopped believing that God wanted the Qing dynasty to rule over China. The setting was right in the 1840s for a rebellion. The story of this rebellion began with a man named Hong Xiquan, who was born in 1814 and dies in 1864. Hong was a government bureaucrat living in a village outside of Guangzhou. During the First Opium War, Hong was helpless as he watched British Marines come to his town and dig up the graves of his ancestors. The British chopped off the bound feet of the female skeletons to take them home to England as souvenirs. You can imagine how humiliating and how frustrating Hong might have felt, and Hong blamed the Qing government. But there's a second influence for Hong in the rise of the rebellion, and that was paradoxically Christianity. Hong was introduced to the Old and New Testaments by British missionaries, and this begins a more bizarre part of the story of the Taiping. In the 1840s, Hong claimed to be the younger brother of Jesus, and he claimed that he was sent by God to overthrow the Qing dynasty and to create a kingdom of heaven on earth. Hong's rebellion began slowly. He first recruited those living in southern China who were politically frustrated with the Qing's inability to stop the British. Second, and this is inspired by Jesus' teachings of social equality, Hong promised famine-stricken peasants the redistribution of land. So there were economic causes to the rebellion as well as political. And finally, Hong promised social reform. He promised to stop the spread of the opium addiction, give legal equality to all Chinese no matter their social class, and he even promised to grant equality to women. So over the course of the 1840s, Hong developed a following that was angry at the Qing, typically poor and without much to lose, and they were also fanatical. We can assume that the rebels genuinely believed that they were on a mission from God to completely recreate society. By 1851, Hong's army numbered over 1 million people. They controlled 17 Chinese provinces, and Hong officially declared a new kingdom the Taiping Tianguo, which means, quote, the heavenly kingdom of great peace. Over the next 3 years, the Taiping continued to expand their territory. In 1853, they captured the town of Nanjing, which is right here. Nanjing was considered the second most important city in China behind Beijing. Nanjing became the new capital of the Taiping kingdom, and Hong increasingly ruled like just another emperor. He was a ruler inspired less by Jesus' teachings in the New Testament, and it seemed more influenced by the wrathful and judgmental God of the Old Testament. In this kingdom of heavenly peace, discipline and obedience were emphasized over grace and love. Private property was banned, in theory at least, and ownership of all goods was held in common. The Taiping banned all narcotics, including opium, alcohol, and tobacco. They even attempted to ban sex. Couples, Hong believed, had to wait until the second coming of God before procreating. The Taiping were also quick to use the death penalty to enforce their rule, and they had the massive, well-organized army to intimidate the population. Now let's try to switch our focus away from the perspective of the Taiping and now to the Qing government, which was called the Qing dynasty. It was headquartered in Beijing. This is where the story gets even more complicated. In the 1850s, the Qing had a more immediate problem on their hands other than just the Taiping. The British and also the French wanted more trading ports to sell not only opium, but also manufactured goods produced by Europe's booming industrial revolution. In 1856, the British and French found excuses to declare another war on China. For the British, the excuse came when a Qing official boarded a British ship and unceremoniously removed the British flag. The French declared war when a French missionary was murdered. Thus began the Second Opium War, lasting from 1856 to 1860. For 4 years, the Europeans raided cities along the coast of China. This time, they marched all the way to Beijing and captured the emperor's palace. The emperor therefore had little choice but to accept British and French demands. Demand number 1, legalize the selling of opium. The second demand, cede direct control of major Chinese ports and land in the interior of China to the Europeans. In exchange, the Qing dynasty was allowed to continue to exist, and the British even agreed to help defeat the Taiping rebels. The British, however, had an economic motivation for attacking the Taiping. Hong's armies threatened the new British forts near Shanghai, which was a major trading port for British goods. Ironically, the man who most helped the Qing defeat the Taiping was Charles George Gordon. He was the same British general who ordered his soldiers to burn the emperor's palace in 1860. With new British training and weapons, and in addition to the soldiers, the Qing pushed the Taiping back to Nanjing. For 2 years, the Qing and British laid siege to this rebel capital. Hong refused to retreat and refused to surrender. In June 1864, when all hope was lost, Hong committed suicide with 100,000 of his followers. By July 1864, the Qing forces had destroyed Nanjing. I'd like to read a quick quote from the memoirs of one of the Qing generals who was tasked with killing off the last remnants of the rebel army. And the quote reads, "When we entered the city and approached Hong's palace, no less than several hundred of the female palace attendants hung themselves in the front garden, while the number of rebels that were drowned in the city moat exceeded 2,000. During the next 3 days, we searched through the city for any rebels we could find, and in 3 days killed over 100,000 men. The creek was filled with bodies. The fire in the city raged for 3 days and nights, and still there were some rebels lurking and keeping up a steady fire on the troops." Thus ended the Taiping Rebellion, one of the bloodiest conflicts of the 19th century. The long-lasting significance of the rebellion was the weakening of the Qing dynasty. The government never recovered from the conflict and would collapse about 60 years later. Finally, and this is important for your essay, the Taiping Rebellion offers a fascinating and tragic example of the unintended consequences of European imperialism. British intervention was both one of the causes of the rebellion and also a reason for its final collapse.